Samuel Harris, an 11-year-old with a mop of sandy brown hair and a wide, curious smile, had a knack for finding joy in the simplest of things. In the quiet, close-knit town of Cedar Hollow, where neighbors shared baked goods and life moved at an unhurried pace, Samuel stood out as a beacon of warmth. Despite his young age, he had a sense of compassion that seemed beyond his years. His parents, Julia and Marcus, worked hard to provide for their family, instilling in Samuel the values of kindness, humility, and a strong work ethic. Samuel's weekly allowance was a testament to those values. Earned by doing chores, washing dishes, sweeping the front porch, or helping with the laundry, his small stipend of $5 was something he cherished. He kept it in a tin box under his bed, saving for books, small toys, or an occasional treat from the candy store. Yet to Samuel, the value of his savings wasn't just in what it could buy. It represented his contribution to the family's effort. One bright Saturday morning, the sun bathed Cedar Hollow in a golden glow, making the white picket fences and flower-filled gardens gleam. Samuel and his mother walked to the bustling town square for their usual weekend errands. The square was alive with activity. Vendors called out their wares, the smell of fresh bread wafted from the bakery, and a street performer strummed a cheerful tune on his guitar. The scene was a mix of color and sound, brimming with the comforting charm of familiarity. Julia handed Samuel a cloth bag. "Why don't you pick out some apples from Mrs. Turner's stall while I get the bread?" Samuel nodded and hurried toward the familiar stall, where plump red and green apples were piled high. As he waited in line, his eyes wandered across the square, soaking in the lively atmosphere. That's when he noticed a man sitting on a wooden bench near the fountain. The man was hunched over, his shoulders drooping under the weight of an invisible burden. The man's clothes were wrinkled and stained, his dark hair slightly matted. He looked out of place amidst the cheerful scene, as though he didn't belong. But what struck Samuel the most was the man's expression, a hollow, faraway look, as if he hadn't eaten or rested in days. Something about the man tugged at Samuel's heart. After paying for the apples, Samuel walked back to his mother, who was inspecting loaves of bread at the bakery stall. "Mom, can I look around a little?" he asked. Julia, used to Samuel's curious nature, waved him off with a smile. "Just don't wander too far." Samuel wandered toward the bench, his small frame casting a shadow as he approached the man cautiously. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice gentle but uncertain. The man looked up, startled by the interruption. His piercing blue eyes met Samuel's, softening as he realized it was a child addressing him. "Yes," he replied hoarsely, his voice rough like gravel. Samuel hesitated for a moment before reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, the entirety of his week's allowance. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "You can use this to buy something to eat." The man stared at the bill, his expression a mix of surprise, gratitude, and disbelief. I can't take your money, kid," he said, shaking his head. "But you need it more than I do," Samuel insisted, his earnest brown eyes unwavering. "There's a sandwich shop just over there. You'll feel better if you eat something." The man hesitated, his fingers trembling as he reached out to accept the money. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice breaking. "What's your name?" Samuel, the boy replied with a shy but proud smile. "What's yours?" "Robert," the man said, his voice steadier now. "Thank you, Samuel. You have no idea what this means to me." Robert stood slowly, glancing toward the sandwich shop Samuel had pointed out. "I'll pay you back someday," he added, though the weight in his tone suggested he wasn't sure how. Samuel watched as Robert walked away, his steps still sluggish but filled with a faint spark of hope. A warm feeling spread through Samuel's chest, not pride, exactly, but a quiet sense of having done something right. When Julia returned to find Samuel by her side again, she noticed the absence of his allowance. "What happened to your money?" she asked, a mix of curiosity and concern in her voice. Samuel pointed toward Robert, who was now seated with a sandwich and a small drink. "I gave it to that man. He looked really hungry." Julia followed his gaze, her expression softening as she saw the man. "That was very kind of you, Samuel," she said, though a note of worry lingered. "But next time, let me know first, okay?" Samuel nodded, but he felt no regret. As they made their way home, Robert waved to Samuel from the bench, his sandwich half-eaten. Samuel waved back, his heart light. He had no way of knowing then how much that single gesture would change his life or the lives of those around him. The next morning, the Harris family's small kitchen was filled with the comforting sounds of a typical Sunday pancake sizzling on the griddle, the steady drip of the coffee pot, and the occasional squeak of Marcus's chair as he flipped through the newspaper. Samuel sat at the table, doodling in a notebook, while his mother added another stack of pancakes to the growing pile. Marcus glanced at his wife. "So Julia tells me you gave your allowance away yesterday," he said, his voice curious but kind. Samuel nodded, looking up from his doodle. "There was this man at the square," he explained. "He looked really hungry, Dad. I couldn't just walk away." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a thoughtful smile. "That's a good heart you've got there, kiddo. Not everyone would have done the same." Julia placed a plate of pancakes in front of Samuel and added, "I wasn't sure about it at first, but you should have seen how grateful that man was. I think Samuel did the right thing." As the family dug into breakfast, Samuel couldn't stop thinking about Robert. The man's weary expression, his faltering steps. Samuel wondered what might have brought him to that bench in the first place. The thought lingered with him throughout the day. Later that afternoon, while Samuel was sprawled on the porch with a book, the sound of a car pulling into their driveway caught his attention. A sleek black sedan, shiny enough to reflect the surrounding trees, rolled to a stop. A man in a gray suit stepped out, carrying a small envelope. Samuel stood up, curiosity piqued. "Mom. Dad. Someone's here." Julia appeared from the garden, wiping her hands on her apron, and Marcus followed her out the front door. The man smiled politely and approached them. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice professional yet warm. "Is this the Harris residence?" Julia nodded cautiously. "Yes, it is. Can I help you?" The man extended the envelope toward her. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Robert Alden. He asked me to deliver this personally." Julia blinked, confused. "Robert Alden," she repeated, glancing at Marcus and then at Samuel, who had crept closer. "Who's that?" The man smiled again, glancing at Samuel. "I believe your son met him yesterday in the town square." Samuel's eyes widened. "Robert? Is he okay?" The man nodded. "He's doing much better, thanks to your generosity." He wanted to express his gratitude. Julia opened the envelope cautiously, her hands steady but her expression puzzled. Inside was a neatly folded letter, written in elegant, flowing handwriting. She read it aloud. "Dear Samuel, thank you for your kindness yesterday. It may have seemed like a small gesture to you, but to me it meant the world. I've been going through a challenging time, and your selflessness reminded me of the good in people. Please accept this business card as a token of my gratitude. If you or your family ever need assistance, don't hesitate to reach out. Warm regards. Robert Alden." Oh. Tucked inside the letter was a sleek business card embossed with Robert's name, address, and a number. Marcus raised an eyebrow, examining the card. "Who exactly is this Robert Alden?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss his personal details," the man in the suit replied. "But I can tell you he was deeply moved by your son's kindness." Samuel beamed, his chest swelling with pride. Julia and Marcus, though still confused, thanked the messenger before he returned to his car and drove off. The letter sparked a flurry of questions. Who was Robert Alden? Why had he sent a messenger instead of delivering the letter himself? And why did he carry himself with such dignity despite appearing so disheveled the day before? Julia and Marcus couldn't shake their curiosity, But Samuel remained content with the simple truth he had helped someone, and that was enough for him. A few days later, while Marcus was tidying Samuel's room, his curiosity got the better of him. He retrieved the business card from Samuel's nightstand and decided to do a quick search online. When the results loaded, his eyes widened in astonishment. Julia Marcus called, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Come here. You need to see this." Julia hurried into the living room, drying her hands on a dish towel. "What's wrong?" Marcus pointed at his phone screen. "Do you remember the man Samuel helped? Robert Alden." Julia peered at the screen, her mouth falling open as she read the articles. Robert Alden wasn't just anyone. He was the founder of a renowned tech company, celebrated for his charitable initiatives and his passion for giving back. Over the years, Robert had donated millions to education, housing, and healthcare projects across the country. But he didn't look like a wealthy man, Julia said, shaking her head in disbelief. How could someone like him end up sitting on a bench, looking so lost? Marcus shrugged, equally perplexed. Maybe he was having a bad day, like he said. Or maybe he wanted to see how people treat him when they don't know who he is. At that moment, Samuel wandered in, catching the tail end of their conversation. "Does this mean Robert doesn't need help anymore?" he asked innocently. Marcus chuckled and pulled Samuel into a hug. "No, son. It means you helped someone who's made it his mission to help others. That's pretty special." The mystery of Robert Alden lingered in their minds, but the Harris family carried on with their daily lives. Then, one evening, their phone rang. Julia answered, her voice polite but guarded. "Mrs. Harris," a familiar voice said warmly. "This is Robert Alden. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." Julia blinked, caught off guard. "Not at all, Mr. Alden. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to invite your family to my estate this weekend," Robert said. "I'd like to thank Samuel in person and properly express my gratitude. Please bring everyone." Julia hesitated, unsure of what to say. Marcus, sensing her uncertainty, took the phone. "We'd be honored," he said, his voice steady. "Thank you for the invitation." As the weekend approached, excitement buzzed through the Harris household. Samuel was curious about what lay ahead, Julia was cautiously optimistic, and Marcus was determined to make a good impression. They borrowed their neighbor's car, dressed in their Sunday best, and set off for the city early Saturday morning. None of them could have imagined how profoundly the visit would change their lives. The Harris family arrived at the estate just before noon, the borrowed car rumbling up a long, tree-lined driveway. The air was crisp, and the sunlight filtered through the canopy above, casting dappled shadows on the road. When the mansion came into view, Samuel pressed his face against the car window, his eyes widening in awe. The sprawling estate looked like something out of a storybook, with its grand architecture, immaculate gardens, and a fountain at the center of a circular drive. Water sprayed into the air, sparkling like diamonds in the sunlight. "Is this where Robert lives?" Samuel asked, his voice filled with wonder. "I guess so," Marcus replied, tightening his grip on the steering wheel. "This is something else." Julia adjusted the hem of her dress, trying to appear composed despite her nerves. "Remember, we're here because of Samuel's kindness," she reminded herself aloud. At the entrance, a uniformed butler greeted them with a warm smile. "Welcome to Mr. Alden's estate. Please, follow me." They stepped into a foyer that was as grand as the exterior, with polished marble floors, an enormous crystal chandelier, and artwork that looked like it belonged in a museum. Samuel's head swiveled, trying to take in every detail. Marcus and Julia exchanged a glance, each silently wondering how someone who lived in such luxury could have seemed so lost just days before. "Do you think he's like a king or something?" Samuel whispered. Before anyone could respond, a familiar voice called out from the top of the grand staircase. "Welcome." Robert descended the stairs, his stride confident but his demeanor warm. He wore a tailored navy suit that accentuated his professional air. but his face was as Samuel remembered, kind and approachable. "It's so good to see you again," Robert said, his eyes twinkling as he addressed Samuel. "You must be Julia and Marcus. I've been looking forward to meeting you." Robert shook Marcus's hand firmly and nodded warmly at Julia. When he knelt to Samuel's level, his expression softened. "Samuel, you probably don't realize it, but meeting you that day made all the difference for me." Samuel blushed and looked down. "I just gave you my allowance. It wasn't a big deal." Robert's smile deepened. "It was a very big deal. Come with me, I want to show you something." The butler led them into a cozy sitting room with tall windows that overlooked a blooming garden. A tea service and an assortment of pastries had been laid out on a low table, and the atmosphere felt surprisingly intimate despite the grandeur of the surroundings. As they settled into the plush chairs, Robert sat across from them, his demeanor calm but purposeful. "Before anything else, I want to thank you all," Robert began. "Samuel's act of kindness didn't just help me through a tough moment, it reminded me of what truly matters." Julia, her curiosity getting the better of her, asked gently, "If you don't mind me asking, Mr. Alden, what brought you to that bench in the square?" Robert sighed, his gaze turning introspective. "Please call me Robert. And I don't mind at all, it's something I think about often. A few weeks ago, I was going through one of the most difficult periods of my life. Despite everything I've built, I felt disconnected. My work had become all-consuming, and I was questioning whether any of it still had meaning." He paused, his hands clasped loosely in his lap. "That day, I'd left my home in a rush, forgetting my wallet and phone. I sat on that bench, overwhelmed and unsure of my next step. That's when Samuel found me." Samuel tilted his head. "But you're rich. Why didn't you just go to one of those fancy places?" Robert chuckled softly. "Wealth doesn't protect you from feeling lost, Samuel. That day, I didn't need money or luxury. I needed to see kindness. You gave me that." Marcus and Julia listened in silence, their skepticism melting into admiration. Robert reached for a folder on the table and handed it to Marcus. "I've been thinking a lot about how I could repay that kindness." Marcus opened the folder and found several neatly typed documents. His eyes scanned the pages, his expression shifting from confusion to astonishment. This is a scholarship," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For Samuel. To Lakeside Academy." Julia's hands flew to her mouth. "A scholarship? Are you serious?" Robert nodded, his smile genuine. "Very serious. Lakeside Academy is one of the finest schools in the state, and I've partnered with them through my foundation to support students like Samuel, students with bright futures and big hearts. The scholarship covers tuition, books, and any other expenses." Samuel's eyes lit up. "A scholarship? Does that mean I get to go to a fancy school?" "Not just a fancy school," Samuel, Robert said, laughing. "A place where your potential can grow. I have no doubt you'll do great things." Julia struggled to find her voice. "Mr. Alden, Robert, it's too much. We don't even know how to thank you." "You don't need to," Robert replied, his voice steady. "Samuel's gesture reminded me of what I'd lost sight of. This is my way of paying it forward." The Harris family spent the rest of the afternoon at the estate, sharing stories and getting to know Robert on a more personal level. Despite his success, he was remarkably down to earth, speaking openly about his struggles and the lessons he'd learned along the way. As the sun began to set, Robert walked them to their car. "This isn't goodbye," he said, his tone warm. "I hope to stay in touch and watch Samuel's journey. You've raised an exceptional young man." Marcus shook Robert's hand firmly. "Thank you for believing in our son." Julia, her earlier reservations completely gone, embraced Robert briefly. "You've changed our lives today. We'll never forget this." On the drive back to Cedar Hollow, the car was filled with quiet reflection. Marcus and Julia were overwhelmed with gratitude, but it was Samuel who seemed the most at peace. "What's on your mind?" kiddo Marcus asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "I'm just happy," Samuel said simply. "Happy that I could help someone. And happy that someone believed in me." Julia reached back to squeeze Samuel's hand, her voice soft. "You deserve this, Samuel. Don't ever forget that." The family drove on in peaceful silence, the glow of the day settling into their hearts as they looked forward to the journey ahead. The weeks following the visit to Robert Alden's estate were a whirlwind for the Harris family. News of Samuel's scholarship spread quickly through Cedar Hollow, bringing an outpouring of congratulations from neighbors and friends. Everyone seemed eager to share how Samuel's kindness had inspired them. The town's mayor even stopped by one evening to commend the family, saying Samuel's story was a testament to the power of compassion. For Samuel, life took on an exciting new rhythm. He was set to begin at Lakeside Academy in just a few weeks. The prestigious school, known for its sprawling campus, expert teachers, and challenging curriculum, was a world away from the small public school he currently attended. Although nervous, Samuel felt a spark of anticipation every time he thought about the opportunities awaiting him. The Harris family's first visit to the academy for orientation was a day Samuel would never forget. As they pulled into the parking lot, Samuel craned his neck to take in the ivy-covered buildings, the gleaming windows of the state-of-the-art science labs, and the field stretching as far as he could see. He felt a flutter of excitement mixed with unease. Would he fit in here? An administrator met the family at the entrance, her demeanor warm and welcoming. "You must be Samuel Harris," she said with a smile. "We've heard such wonderful things about you." Samuel glanced at his father, who nodded reassuringly. "Yes, Ma," Samuel replied, his voice steady but shy. "Thank you for having me here." The administrator knelt slightly to meet Samuel's eyes. "Samuel, we're thrilled to have someone with your kindness and determination join us. You're going to do great things here." Samuel's nervousness eased slightly, and as the tour began, he found himself captivated by the sheer scope of the academy. He saw classrooms filled with advanced technology, a library bigger than anything he could have imagined, and an art studio that practically glowed with creativity. By the end of the day, Samuel felt a little more confident. He belonged here, not because of wealth or status, but because someone had believed in his potential. On the drive home, Marcus turned to Samuel and said, "What do you think, kiddo?" Samuel grinned. "I think I'm going to love it." As the weeks turned into months, Samuel flourished at Lakeside Academy. He made new friends, excelled in his classes, and even joined the school's robotics club, where his curiosity and problem-solving skills earned him praise from teachers and peers alike. Yet, despite the new experiences and challenges, Samuel never lost touch with his roots. Every weekend he returned to Cedar Hollow and made it a point to visit the town square. He often sat on the same wooden bench where he had first met Robert, reflecting on how much had changed since that day. The bench had become a quiet sanctuary for Samuel, a place where he could remember the power of a single moment of kindness. One Saturday, as Samuel sat on the bench watching the fountain's gentle spray, a familiar figure approached from across the square. It was Robert, dressed casually in a sweater and jeans, carrying a small package under his arm. His smile widened when he saw Samuel. "Robert," Samuel called, standing up to greet him. Robert quickened his pace, his face lighting up. "Samuel, it's good to see you." They sat on the bench together, and Samuel eagerly shared updates about his time at Lakeside Academy. He spoke about his classes, the new things he was learning, and the friends he'd made. Robert listened attentively, his pride evident. "I owe it all to you," Samuel said earnestly. "If you hadn't given me this chance." Robert placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "No, Samuel. You earned this. Your kindness started something that I was just lucky enough to continue. Don't ever forget that." He handed Samuel the package. "I wanted to give you this," Robert said. "It's a little reminder of the lesson you taught me." Samuel opened the package carefully. Inside was a framed photo of the two of them, taken during the Harris family's visit to Robert's estate. Below the photo was an inscription that read, "Kindness sparks change." Samuel's eyes glistened as he looked up at Robert. "Thank you. I'll keep it forever." Years passed, and Samuel's journey continued to reflect the values that had defined him since childhood. After graduating from Lakeside Academy with honors, he earned a scholarship to a prestigious university, where he pursued a degree in education. His goal was simple yet profound: to inspire others as Robert had inspired him. Samuel became a beloved teacher in a small town, not unlike Cedar Hollow. His students often heard the story of the day he met a hungry stranger on a bench, and how one small act of kindness had changed both their lives. Samuel's humility and compassion left an indelible mark on every student who crossed his path. Meanwhile, Robert and Samuel remained close friends. They collaborated on several initiatives through Robert's foundation, creating scholarships and mentorship programs for underprivileged students. Together, they touched countless lives, ensuring that Samuel's story of kindness continued to ripple outward. Back in Cedar Hollow, the fountain where Samuel had first met Robert became a cherished landmark. A plaque was installed at its base, bearing the words, "In honor of the boy who shared and the man who believed." Julia and Marcus watched their son's journey with pride and gratitude. Though their lives had been transformed in ways they never imagined, the values that guided their family remained steadfast. Kindness, they knew, was the thread that bound everything together. One sunny afternoon, Samuel returned to the bench by the fountain, now a young man with a world of experiences behind him. As he watched the sunlight dance on the water's surface, he smiled, reflecting on the moment that had started it all. In his heart, Samuel knew that the smallest acts of kindness could spark the greatest changes, just as they had for him and Robert. And with that thought, he stood up, ready to continue his journey of inspiring others to believe in the power of compassion.